Hey, y'all, and welcome back to another episode discussing astrology. As you can see, I'm a little bit under the weather, but the show must go on. Last week we talked about the beauty, pleasure, and desire that is Venus energy. While this week we're going to talk about the planet of war, which is Mars. Now, Mars and Venus energy, typically through the mythology pantheon, is always more than likely going to be conjoined. Like Venus will be Mars's husband or Mars's mistress or whatever the case may be. Okay. These energies kind of are like the same type of energy, but a little bit different. So we'll jump right in. As always, let's start with the gods or goddesses associated with Mars. So we'll start by talking about the Egyptian god. Now, the Egyptian god of war and protection is actually Horus, which makes sense because Horus is associated with the horizon or the beginning, okay? He sits in the same place as the sign of Aries does. Horus is often associated with protection of kingdoms and pharaohs, along with healing, and he's also associated with the sun and the sky. Osiris is the god of the underworld, and Isis is the god of magic and healing. Those two are supposed to be the parents of Horus, and his siblings are supposed to be Aset, who we talked about last time. She is the goddess of healing and felines, and Anubis. Now, Anubis is actually one of the gods of the underworld. He helps people pass over into the underworld. We have not talked about him yet, but he does have like the head of a dog. Horus is often depicted with the head of a falcon because he flies across the sky. His right eye symbolizes the sun, and his left eye symbolizes the moon. So it talks about this conjoining of electric and magnetic energy. Okay. Horus had multiple love interests. Hathor was his main wife, who represents that Venus energy that we just talked about. Okay. He's also linked to his mother Isis. He's also linked to Serket, and he's also linked to Nephthys. Now, the Greek god of war was Ares, who is the consort to the beauty that is Aphrodite. Now, they are both married. So they were committing adultery and having this adulterous affair when Aphrodite's husband trapped them both in like this golden net. Okay. So Ares was feared for his strength, and he was brutal and violent because he was a warrior spirit. Okay. So the Greeks actually looked at Ares as something to fear. Okay. Now you'll see the common theme again, like I said, of Mars energy being married to Venus energy, because Mars is a lot happier when it's working with this balance and harmony that Venus brings. Ares was the son of Zeus and Hera. He was depicted as a mature warrior with a beard. He was often nude with a helmet and a spear. He is associated with dogs and snakes, and he was hated by other gods due to his brutal and violent nature. They believed him to be bloodthirsty and destructive, and Ares represented the human nature of conflict and inherent violence, meaning that all of us have that type of darkness, that type of impulsive, violent, brutal nature inside of us. And Ares represented that concept, okay, that archetype. He was mainly worshipped, though, in northern Greece. Now, the Romans had Mars. Now, Mars was one of the most important gods to the Romans. He was considered to actually be a noble protector of civilians. He was often depicted as a young man with a manly physique. He was linked to courage, strength, and military prowess. Mars was the guardian of agriculture, which helped the Romans to sustain life by having crops that are actually living. Mars was considered to be the god of the land, and the only god that was revered over him when it comes to protection was his son Jupiter, which we'll talk about next week. Okay. Like Venus, his backstory is that of Ares in from the Greek pantheon. Okay. So the Romans literally just colonized the mythology behind the Greek pantheon, which was colonized from the Egyptians, which was colonized from the Assyrians. And I'm not going to say the Egyptian was colonized from the Assyrians, but a lot of their gods symbolize the same gods as the Assyrians, which come from ancient Babylon, ancient Mesopotamia. Okay. Next, we have the Hindus, and they have two gods, but they use these gods interchangeably, but they are two separate gods, and they just ended up being merged later on. So the first one is Kartikeya, and the second one is Murugan, and they're both the Hindu gods of war. They are the sons of Shiva. Shiva is part of that triple deity and represents that destruction and transformation, part of that triune deity. And the mother is Parvati, who is that Venus energy again. He is often shown riding a peacock and holding a spear. He's linked with victory, courage, and wisdom. Um, Kartikeya is mainly worshipped in northern India, and Murugan was worshipped in southern India, along with a couple other smaller places. And they also have Indra, who was the king of gods. He was also once called the god of war. However, he is mostly associated with rain, thunder, cattle, and warfare. The Babylonians had Nergal, and he's the god of war and destruction. He was a very passionate god who was devoted to the goddess Ereshkigal, and they ruled the underworld together. So they were the kings and queens of the underworld. He is linked with death, war, and destruction. He was often worshipped during times of plague and war. He was later infused with Nineruta, and he was often shown in like a long robe with an open front with his kind of like his legs showing, and he held a scepter with a lion head, and sometimes it had a double lion head, and he had this curved sword. Now there's actually not a lot of like really good pictures of Nergal, but I did find some that are in those Assyrian tablets, so I'll show you guys those. The Mayans, they don't have a direct correlation, but they have like four gods that kind of fit this mold. So they have Bullock, Chabatin, who is the god of war, violence, and sudden death. He was often shown with a stern facial expression and a black line across his eyes and cheeks. He symbolizes death and darkness, and he was also worshipped in times of war. And then we have Apuk, who we talked about before. He's the god of death, decay, and the underworld. And then we talked about the goddess Ixchel, who is associated with the cycles of life and death. And then they have another goddess, and her name is Chin. She was the goddess of maize, which is corn, magic, and she was a counselor to the kings. She was also linked to agriculture as well, which is, if you look at Horus and Greek and Roman god, they were all linked to agriculture in the land. The Celtics had this god called Neat or Net, which means fighting or passion. He was typically worshipped as part of the Irish pantheon. They also had a goddess who is called Bad, which just means crow, and she was linked with war and death. She was known to stir up conflict, and she would predict who would win that conflict. So she kind of could see what the outcome of situations would be, and she would like stir that shit up. Talk about a messy boots. And then we have Norse, and Norse has a couple of gods that fit into this. The first one is going to be Odin, which we talked about before. He is the creator of all and the father of men. He's also linked to war, magic, and wisdom. But they also had Tyre, who believed in peace and was often imprisoned by Odin because of this. But he had complex feelings about war and peace, and he was associated with war, law, justice, trial. He was associated with duels, authority, oaths, courage, and heroic glory. Now, the last one is Freya, and she is the goddess we talked about when we talked about Venus energy, and she is responsible for selecting warriors. Okay, so those are the ancient gods and goddesses that are associated with this Mars energy. Okay, now Mars is associated with the number 9. 9 has to do with completion of cycles. 9 is a very, very divine number. The symbol for Mars looks like this, and it's associated with the day Tuesday. That's why it's really, really important that you do not get into an argument on Tuesday, because you're going to be a little bit more volatile. You're going to be a little bit more impulsive in your communications. It's better to handle conflicts on Wednesdays, which are ruled by Mercury, which is the planet of communication. Tuesdays are really good for getting shit done, and Tuesdays are really good for starting new things because it's Mars energy. Again, rules Aries, which is the beginning of our zodiac season or our reproductive cycle. Okay, so it's really, really good to start new things on Tuesdays. The colors associated with is obviously red, which is indicative of the color of Mars itself. The parts of the body it rules are going to be the muscles. And esoterically, you just need to add the adrenal glands and the external reproductive organs, which makes sense because Mars rules Scorpio as well, which is about the reproductive organs, sex, and all of that. The metal associated with Mars is iron. The stones are going to be garnet, ruby, and jasper, which are all red. Herbs and incense are going to be pine and sarsaparilla, which I hope I said that right. And then the plants are going to be cedar and holly. And then the chakras, again, esoterically and modern are very, very different. But esoteric says the throat, modern says the solar plexus. Now, to me, the solar plexus makes sense because it is associated with your will and your power. Okay. And that's what, if you get too much into this Mars energy, that's what you're going to seek is like greed, hatred, power, like that, those type of things. But esoterics they understand something about this that we don't understand. So again, just take the information with a grain of salt. When it comes to the planets that Mars rules, it's going to be Scorpio and Aries. And then the houses are going to be the houses that are ruled by Scorpio and Aries. Now, Aries rules the first house. And the first house is about self. It's about appearances, beginnings. It's about the body. It's about first impressions, attitudes, identity, and your approach to life. Okay. Whereas the eighth house, which is ruled by Scorpio, is about merging. It's about sex and intimacy, shared finances, inheritances, taxes, loans, assets, properties, joint ventures or goals. So business partnerships, mysteries, and also partners' resources. So other people's money. So you can actually look at the eighth house and it'll tell you based on what planets are in the eighth house if you'll have a partner that has money. So just a little tidbit. It is exalted in Capricorn, which means that Mars really likes to be in Capricorn. Okay, so it's exalted in Capricorn and it falls in Cancer, meaning it does not like to be in this Cancerian energy. The cycle of Mars is 22 months, so almost 2 years, about 1.8 years. And then the card that it's associated with is the Tower. Okay, the Tower in tarot is a really, really unique card. A lot of people, when they see the Tower, they think, oh my gosh, this is horrible. But that's not really what the Tower is about. Okay, if you actually look at the card, it's a tower that's sitting on top of like this small slither of land, and the tower is coming toppling down. But the card represents you destroying everything that you had originally built your foundation upon because it was not stable enough to hold where you are going. So yes, it is a card of destruction and chaos, but those cycles have to happen in order for your energy to be renewed, in order for you to build on a foundation that is actually stable enough for where you are going. All right, so let's talk about what Mars symbolized in the ancient world, esoteric world, and then modern world. So anciently, we would chart the path of Mars, and it looks very similar to Venus's path, but it seems that Venus is moving faster than Mars, which we know by the cycle period. Mars was considered to be the god of war, which governed how we act and the energy of forces in our lives. This energy symbolizes that power or force that instigates and keeps things moving. It also represents the courage and brutality that comes with war, our demanding nature as a child, and our intolerance of abuse. When you think about Aries, Aries is considered to be the infant of the zodiac. Okay. That's why Aries tend to be a little bit more impulsive, a little bit more quick to anger, but they also get over it really fast. So it really feels like a fucking hissy fit. But Aries are the infants of the zodiac. Okay. They begin everything. Okay. Now, on the other side, it represents the hustler of like a dancer, an artist, an entrepreneur, an innovator. It rules Aries, which again are a little bit impulsive, courageous, and pistol starters, and Scorpio, which are a little bit more deep and about truth and lies, along with our sexual nature. Okay, this planet is not so much about force, but the style used to exert that force. Now, this energy is one that needs to be trained because there is a component of this energy that likes a challenge or the chase of things, okay? And the Aries part loves pure adventure, like all fire signs. All fire signs are here to show us how to let go, right? Because if you think about fire, the moment you set a fire, you cannot control that fire. That fire is going to go for as long and as far as it fucking wants to go. Okay, it's spontaneous energy. It's not predictable energy. It likes to jump and move from place to place. That's what this fire energy is about, okay? Now, there is a bit of balancing that needs to happen with this energy because force does not always win. It's the timing of that force that matters the most. And that is why patience and skill need to be taught or earned through practice with this energy. Okay. Philosophers like Carl Jung used Mars to discuss the latter part of our life after our self-realization. Okay. And um, if you think about this, a lot of, let's just say, infant energy, because we'll just keep it about Aries for right now, just because a lot of this has to do with this Aries energy. Um, they have to go through life experiences in order for them to learn from those experiences. And through those experiences, they start to realize what they like and what they don't like. Through those adventures, they start to realize what they like and what they don't like. Okay. So when that starts to happen, that's when Mars is able to come into balance with all of the force and energy that it holds. Okay. So he also believed that only through training our Mars placements could we become the most confident and effective person we are meant to be. Ancient astrologers linked Mars directly with how we act. Like, do you address challenges or do you just walk away from them and not say anything? Do we display courage and confidence or do we display cowardice, right? What attitudes do we confront life with? Mars asks these questions. Are you a warrior who has the courage to stand up and fight, or do you depend on diplomacy, negotiations, and intellect? Like, all of those questions are things that Mars is asking us, or the things that we can find out through our Mars placements, okay? Like everything, there is a shadow side to this energy. Either you're going to be a hero fighting for justice for others, or you'll be the type that destroys for the adrenaline rush. Shakespeare considered Mars to be the ruler of the fourth age or early adulthood when you're trying to find your way. Okay, so this is between the ages of 23 and 30. And for those of you who have not had your second Saturn return, okay, baby, baby, you come out of that shit a completely different fucking person, okay? So this makes sense because you do all of this exploring to try to come into balance with this energy. And once you have that second Saturn return, it feels like your whole fucking life is turning topsy-turvy, right? And you come out of that more aligned with the version of yourself that you are. When I had my Saturn return, I stopped being so reactive. I started caring about what I was doing, what I was building. I started realizing that a lot of people were in pain and that I wanted to help that. It's like I started this journey that you guys are seeing, live on TikTok. Like I literally started that right when my Saturn return was happening. So, you know, baby. All right. Now, this is when you learn how to manage or train your Mars energy in a way that places skill over natural ability. Now, like I said, I became less reactive, which if you've been following me on TikTok, you know that I used to be a firecracker. I used to tell y'all about the stories of me fighting all the time. Yeah. So glad I got that under control because my Mars is in Aries. So baby, complete infant when I'm upset. And now I feel like I'm more grounded in diplomacy. Like I think before I react. Okay. So yeah, that is the ancient interpretation. Now, esoterically, Mars symbolized action and aggression energy. This planet was called the destroyer and the renewer. Okay, so they associated with Mars with trouble because of its intense influence on the inhabitants of Earth. In fact, traditional astrologists believe Saturn and Mars to be malevolent planets. They believe that depending on where these planets were in your birth chart indicated where you would experience negative side effects or have destructive significance, okay, in those areas, which we still see today. So this comes from the Hellenistic period where Greek astrologers were determining whether they believed a planet to be which means good, or malefic, which is bad, which is also a part of Vedic astrology as well. So Mars was considered to be the lesser of two evils, meaning that it was considered less maleficent than Saturn. But Mars was still associated with destruction. It was associated with cutting ties and breaking of alliances, while Saturn was associated with rejection, exclusion, and any other limiting or restrictive energies. But again, just take this with a grain of salt, because depending on what culture you're talking to or what group of people you're talking to, their views on Mars is completely different, as we've seen in the Greek and Roman pantheon. For example, Ares was the Greek god of war who was feared for the same qualities that Mars, the Roman god of war, was celebrated and praised for. Ares was considered to be violent and bloodthirsty, while Mars was considered to be their protector. Okay, the ancients believed that Mars had to do with desire like Venus, but also manliness. Okay, so this planet represented our ability to exert our life force in an attempt to survive. So, when you're in an emergency situation and that fight or flight kicks in, that adrenaline rush is pumping, and for some reason you are stronger, you're faster, you're quick thinking, right? And some of us are a little bit violent if we backed into a corner, right? You're alert and you feel unsafe. That is the energy that is associated with Mars. How you react in that situation is associated with Mars, okay? Now, the beauty of Mars is that it can destroy and protect passionately. It does both. So there's a lot of duality with this planet, just like Venus. Venus was about beauty and love and all of these great things, but she also was about jealousy, and you better back the up before get violent, right? So a little bit of duality in these energies. Now, in modern astrology, Mars symbolizes assertion and action. Mars gives us the energy to get shit done. It is the action that comes from directing your will, which is associated with your solar plexus, and the masculine principle, which directs, while the feminine principle creates. Today, when you know your Mars placement, you can work with it to feel energized. When I think of Mars, to me, it has to do with how your competitiveness appears, how you are when you're angry, or how you react when you're in danger or threatened, because it has to do with survival and how you handle conflict. It's your warrior spirit. So it's also has to do with how you show up when you have to be courageous, when you have to be brave. According to modern astrologists, though, Mars represents competition, which can be verbal debates or physical action; survival, which is the courage to do what is necessary when our backs is against the wall; strength, capacity for action; fighting spirit; energy, which is how we release physical energy, whether it's through like rigorous sports or something like light like yoga. Mars kind of tells you how this energy shows up. Like, is it chaotic, contained, balanced, sustainable? It depends on what your Mars placement is, okay? It also has to do with vitality, conflict, courage, and the ability to be daring. And this, again, is just about bravery, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally too, okay? This has to do with your ability to push through your limiting beliefs to achieve your goals. That's why Mars is often associated with athletes, engineers, conquerors, pioneers, and entrepreneurs. It's also associated with anger and your sex drive. Our physical need and urge to reproduce comes from this Mars energy, which again comes from Scorpio. That's why a lot of times you'll see when Scorpios become hurt by somebody, they oftentimes more than not are going to go on a sex spree. That is literally how they handle shit sometimes. I've seen it so many fucking times, and it's because that Scorpio energy is about our sex drive. It's about like our reproductive organs. So they're just acting in the shadow side of the energy, okay? Now, Mars is called the red planet because of its color, which comes from the iron oxide covering its surface. Mars is used today for civics and military conflict. It is often linked to surgeons, engineers, barbers, and blacksmiths and the tools that they use. I don't know if y'all remember this, but what makes Earth such a hot commodity and its variable that we're supposed to be exploring in this universe is opposable thumbs. And apparently Mars was the first level of consciousness we went through with these opposable thumbs. But because the energy of Mars is about war and destruction, the Martians, right? Mars, and then Shin just mean like godlike beings. So the godlike beings from Mars, um, created weapons, and they went to war and supposedly blew up the atmosphere of that planet because apparently Mars used to actually look a lot like Earth. Okay, this caused them to have to evacuate to other planets and even star systems, and apparently a lot of them came to Atlantis and taught us how to use weapons as well. These are the people that they associated with as the fallen angels. Okay, so boom, that's Mars, and that concludes our episode on Mars. Next week, we will discuss the expansive and growing nature of Jupiter, which I'm super excited about. Thank you for watching until the end. As always, like, comment, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. I love y'all deep, and until next time.